Imagination for me was always an abstract concept. Ever since I was little, all of the tasks that required creativity and imagination were assigned to me, with the instructions to be creative or do something no one will expect. I felt as if I had received those tasks because I was a child and therefore inherently creative. But this was a mystery to me. What exactly did these instructions mean? Of course, after completing each task, I would be praised because I did put a lot of work into everything that I did, even back then. As the years passed, so did my interest in what exactly being imaginative meant. I suppose unconsciously I kept believing that each person, or more precisely each child, was born creative. So when the time came to choose the modules I would take in my third and final year at university, this module reignited my desire to resume questioning this mysterious concept that is imagination. This is a presentation, or rather the story of my learning journey through the past months, a scrapbook of my thoughts and feelings as I began tackling the subject of creativity. Before the first session, I thought that since this was a journey where I expected to be challenged, both in terms of the academic study of imagination and in terms of my personal perceptions of the subject, I would need to document the changes that occurred along the way. I am the type of person that finds comfort in graphs, lists, and other ways of keeping information tidy, and so I thought the best way for me to go about this was to create a mind map. When thinking about what concepts or words I associated with the imagination, I was surprised that only three came to mind. Out of the three, at the top, I put the definition that I found in the dictionary. Reflecting upon why I felt the need to reach for the dictionary for a word that I had no issue understanding, I realized just how much I rely on definitions and research done by others to enlighten my work. This gave me a sense of disappointment, but nonetheless, I kept it in the mind map. I wanted it to be as raw as possible by the end of the module, and I was determined to not interfere with the process. But what the three clouds also showed me was that I needed to establish an intention going forward. I would attempt to allow myself the time necessary, however long, to form my own opinions before reaching for a book or article that would confirm or deny them. In other words, I was determined to make this a journey of self discovery. During the first sessions of this module, one concept that fascinated me greatly was synesthesia. This, according to my trusted dictionary, represents the production of a sense impression relating to one sense or part of the body by stimulation of another sense or part of the body. And while this definition did not shed much light on the meaning of the word for me, I searched for examples such as if we were to think of a loved one and our minds would associate them with a color. In the resources provided for the course, I found an experiment that discovered what color my name was. I was interested and had to find out right away, even if, after this discovery, I must admit I did not have some revelation, and I don't exactly know why I expected to. But nonetheless, it was an interesting thing to find out. Further, the same batch of resources provided the story of the painter Sargiman, who happens to be blind. I was fascinated by his journey and in awe of both his work and his ambition. I started imagining what would do if I were to go blind, and I am convinced that painting would not be something I would dare aspire to. And so, I was determined to experiment. Thinking of what I could paint, I remembered my intention to self discover, and so the colors came to my mind. Of course, I would use the colors of my name. And with this intention in mind, what else to paint than a self portrait? So I set out a couple of signposts for where I thought my eyes, nose, mouth, and ears would go on the paper, prepared the colors, and used a scarf to cover my eyes. But I quickly took my blindfold off, realizing I had little feeling of what I was doing with a paintbrush, and so I decided to use my fingers to paint myself. It seemed appropriate. After thinking I had completed my work, I uncovered my eyes to see the final product. The process was more therapeutic than I had expected. As I was reaching for my signpost while painting, I felt as if I had succeeded in creating a physical representation of my process of searching for myself. And, in all honesty, it turned out much better than I expected. But what crossed my mind immediately after was the importance of the moment of taking the blindfold off. While I started my painting eager to find out the result, the process of creating had given me so much more than anticipated. and the result did not mean as much as the journey taken to produce it. So if you can, and if you have time, I would definitely recommend it. You might be surprised by what happens and what you discover. But something else came to mind. While this experiment had brought me closer to the blind painter, what saddened me greatly was that he never gets the chance to take the blindfold off. But I quickly realized that it is not about seeing the work, it is about producing it. As we were discussing the idea of play, I found myself wondering why we stop playing, and why do I often think that if I allow myself to play, I would be wasting time that would be more usefully spent doing work. After these discussions, I decided to look deeper into the subject, and it became more and more apparent that work has replaced adult play. There is no serendipity, no surprise, no wonder. Then, I was intrigued by the reasons that based the argument for the need of play in life. The one that stood out to me was that play is a healing activity. Looking forward, I kept seeing mentions of how as adults, we have taken all these tasks and obligations to the extreme, to the detriment of play inside that needs to come up. I found myself surprised by the thoughts that I had subconsciously ingrained in my mind, just like the ones Barbara Brennan mentions. Do we think it almost criminal to play? This made my mind wander to a frustration I had in my current relationship. My partner spends quite a lot of time playing computer games. I always tried not to show that I think he should spend time of things that I deem to be more important because, I want to be a cool girlfriend. This session made me think that while I almost resented how much time he spent playing, I had never tried it. So we spent an afternoon playing games together and him teaching me the basics of it. Don't get me wrong, I still think he spends too much time doing it, but this experience has made me realize just how rarely I do something without it being useful in the traditional sense. And this is something that I intend to explore further, doing things that may not be useful but are forms of self care. In the following weeks, we played with ideas that try to figure out how imagination and insight works. Watching a documentary about this subject, I realized two things. The first, I'm not very good at word games. One of the examples was to find a word that fits with pine, crab, and sauce. Pausing the documentary, I made various attempts at figuring it out, but failed and gave up. In my frustration and newfound ambition, I made another try, looking up other examples of such words. For each, I gave myself 10 minutes to figure it out, and if I didn't, I would look up the solutions. Indeed, these games are not my forte. The second thing I realized is that the documentary clearly encourages imagination, and it is clear that we all should and can become more imaginative. But then I thought about whether society encourages us to be so or not. The first thing that came up as a place for creative expression is the internet. While it has opened the doors to a new kind of society, perhaps even a globalized society with means of communicating with each other faster and easier than ever before, what have we done with it? These are images of a very famous internet challenge, the Ice Bucket Challenge. What these show, and what has become so present in the internet era, is imitation. Imitation over imagination. Just like more and more people started pouring ice cold water on their heads for views, likes, and subscribers, we have become more and more encouraged to imitate rather than come up with innovative content. This reminded me of a project done by Natalie Bookchin. She took several videos from YouTube and set them side by side. These were extracts of videos where people danced to various music in their rooms. But what is striking about them is that they are so similar. The people who create the videos are commonly called creators, but I ask myself, are they really? I believe that we live in a world that, more often than not, encourages simplicity and imitation over complexity and imagination, which is part of why this module has been so important to me, but more on that later. I took this module expecting to be challenged, but what it has also given me is relief. During one of the sessions, one of my fellow travelers on the journey of understanding imagination mentioned the Dunning-Kruger effect. Basically, the more you know, the more aware you are of what and how much you don't know. This had been a recurring feeling for me, but it had never crossed my mind that it would have a name. As you can imagine, this was a big relief for me. During university, I often found myself doing research for an essay or presentation, but never getting the feeling that I am done with the research. There was always another article, video, or book that was left unseen, unwatched, unreferenced, and this feeling followed me with every word I would write. It was always that missing piece that may hold the answers to my questions, and the continuous encouragement to do encompassing enough research did not help because it never seemed enough. Shakespeare writes, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." And I suppose knowing that Shakespeare calls my insecurities wisdom is quite a confidence boost. During the session with this discussion, Naomi said something that stuck with me. I felt the need to write it down quickly so I don't forget it, but that wasn't necessary. It has stayed with me until now, and it will probably continue to. If someone's partner would speak to them the way education speaks to students, I'd tell them to leave. I didn't know what to do with this, because I knew I agreed, but I had never heard it put it this way. So I kept playing in my mind with this idea, a breakup with education. In a sense, I suppose that this presentation and this module in and of themselves are a breakup with education. IATL modules and assessments like this one and the SDA are a protest to the usual guidelines. So if this is a breakup, then I am very excited to be part of it. Here I am, speaking directly to my markers, putting my name on the piece instead of, or rather along with my student number, able to reflect instead of regurgitating information. These may seem small things, but they are a meaningful protest nonetheless. This is also the session where a subject that is very important to me came up, imposter syndrome. I won't go too deeply in this subject because I don't want to spoil my SDA, but this idea that we imagine where and how we belong in a certain space was one that hit home for me. And more deeply, seeing others speak about having the same feelings and going through the same anxieties has lifted a rock off of my shoulders. It may be a phenomenon that isn't exactly pleasant, but, and I'm not sure whether to say fortunately or unfortunately, I realize that I am not alone. And this has relieved a substantial part of an anxiety that has been building up for the last 3 years. Towards the end of the module, we explore the ways in which we imagine the future and whether it is a part of the human condition to think about the future. One of the people in the meeting mentioned that there is this idea that the past is in front of us because we can see it, and it is as if we are walking with our backs turned towards the future because we may not see it, but we still try to predict it based on our past. I thought this was a powerful idea, particularly at a time when we are all trying to figure out what we want our futures to look like. But sometimes I think we must find time to realize that we can't know what the future holds, and simultaneously, we should give ourselves the space for that to be okay. We are in a place where certainty is so often a requirement, but we must not forget that not knowing is okay, not knowing is acceptable, and in spaces such as the ones this module has fostered and created, it is welcomed. If we take our minds back to my initial documentation of my journey, slowly, week by week, my concept of imagination and its reach have started from this and then evolved. Approaching the date of the roundtable discussions, I realized that this meeting will be the last of my university career. Well, the last official one, which made me reflect over just how fast these past 3 years have gone by. I was particularly excited for this session because, due to the freedom that the student devised assessment gives us, I knew that the wonderful group I had been so lucky to be part of will come up with amazing ideas for their projects. And they definitely delivered. Ever since I took my first IATL module, I was fascinated with the discussions that can occur in multidisciplinary groups, which, as a film student, made my mind associated with an effect that is often discussed in media studies. This effect is called the Kuleshov effect, and it basically refers to how two consecutive shots have more meaning than one that is isolated. Now, if you are like me and understand concepts better through examples, I will offer one here. One of the most popular one is this one constructed by Alfred Hitchcock. Imagine you see a shot of about 20 seconds of a man that changes facial expressions from neutral to a slight smile. Nothing fancy, right? Now imagine that this sequence is interrupted by the image of a woman holding her baby. We would naturally assume that this is a nice old man who finds joy in the image of a child and their mother. What about now? If the image was interrupted by a woman who is in her bathing suit, we would assume that this is a pervy old man and the look is not that of joy, but of indecency. This is what the Kuleshov effect refers to. One shot may have little meaning, but when multiple are put together, a variety of different meanings can be made. This is what I think of when I think of multidisciplinary groups. Not that they are pervy, but that when people come from multiple disciplines, we can find meanings that only one of us wouldn't even think of. And I have always believed that the biggest problems we can find with the world need to be analyzed and solved not by an individual from one discipline, but by a team of people working together. And the experience of participating in interdisciplinary work has given me the confidence and even strengthened my belief in this idea. So, dear Naomi and Julia, these weeks have opened my eyes and widened my perception about imagination in ways that I wouldn't have even hoped for before starting this module. I decided that my learning journal needed to be honest, and so it needed to be messy. I apologize if that has made my presentation a bit confusing, but I wanted to portray information in a way that reflects the way I think, and overlapping a lot of images and information is the best way I can reflect that. I also decided that I needed to speak, or rather, I needed you to hear my thoughts rather than read them. Even though presentations are not exactly in my comfort zone or my strong spot, this journey has been very insightful and personal for me. And while I think I express myself better in writing, I needed to talk to you, or rather, talk you through my journey because my priority was giving you a glimpse into my experience. If today was the day before our first session together, I would try to absorb more information out of our sessions. There were times where I was tired or had my mind wandering on emails or master's applications and whatnot, and I would have loved to be more present. But I have learned to be more protective of myself and accepting of the fact that we cannot always operate at full power. So I have taken my journey as it was, and I am more than happy to have done so. I can't say that I have answered any of the questions that I had coming in, but I can say that I have left with more desire to learn and more drive to maybe find some of the answers I am looking for. And if I were to start my mind map today, I can confidently say that there would be more than 3 clouds on there. Thank you for the space you have provided for us all, for the work you put in to make this module possible, and for allowing me to write myself a permission slip and a breakup with the guidelines of the assignments. And finally, thank you for being part of my learning journey and listening to my reflections. Thank you.